Hey there, lovely soul. Welcome back to Noah Stories. How are you today? Have you taken a moment to breathe and be gentle with yourself? Sometimes the smallest moments, a song, a smile, or a soft voice, can change everything. Today's story is one of those gentle shifts. It's about a little girl longing to be seen, a woman with music in her heart, and a man who slowly learns what truly matters. Let's begin. Sophie Grant was a 7-year-old girl living in a world of material abundance but emotional emptiness. Inside a lavish Manhattan mansion, she had everything a child could want: important toys, private tutors, meals prepared by renowned chefs. But what Sophie truly longed for was something far simpler: someone who noticed her. Her father, Nathaniel Grant, was a wealthy CEO, constantly buried in meetings, projects, and international trips. He loved his daughter, but their time together often consisted of rushed goodnights or quiet moments of presence without connection, and her mother had been gone for a long time, leaving behind a space that no luxury could fill. Into that quiet world, Elena Torres arrived like a gentle breeze. Hired as Sophie's caregiver, she soon became something far more. Elena didn't just feed her, bathe her, or drive her to school. She sat with Sophie through long afternoons, listening to stories about strange dreams, invisible fears, and the melodies Sophie had fallen in love with. Elena played the piano, not with grandeur or flair, but with feeling, and one day Sophie discovered that. From then on, every afternoon after school, the two of them would sit by the piano, laughing, playing, and singing softly in a sunlit room filled only with music and warmth. Sophie had never felt more like herself. In Elena's eyes, she wasn't the daughter of billionaire Nathaniel Grant. She was just a little girl, worthy of love and attention. Every time Elena smiled, Sophie felt seen, and for a lonely child, that was everything. Nathaniel Grant came home earlier than usual on a crisp autumn afternoon. He had just wrapped up a major negotiation in London, and instead of heading straight to the office like he always did, he chose to return home. Maybe it was fatigue. Maybe it was the quiet ache he'd been feeling lately. The house was unusually silent when he entered. No voices from staff, no urgent calls from his assistant. As he passed the music room, he paused. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, golden light from the late afternoon sun spilled across the piano keys. Sophie sat there, her back slightly hunched, fingers gently tapping out the notes of a simple classical piece. Beside her sat Elena, guiding her patiently, one hand resting lightly on Sophie's as a soft, wordless encouragement. They didn't know he was watching, and Nathaniel couldn't look away. It wasn't just the fact that Sophie was playing piano, it was how she looked at Elena, eyes filled with trust and affection. It was how Elena smiled quietly every time Sophie played a phrase correctly. It was the warmth radiating from the two of them that made the cold, echoing room suddenly feel alive. In that moment, Nathaniel saw something he'd somehow missed all this time. His daughter had found a place where she belonged, and the person who created that space was Elena. He stepped back quietly, not wanting to disturb the scene unfolding before him, but inside something shifted. A soft stirring, not yet defined, but undeniably real. And for the first time, Nathaniel saw Elena not just as someone who worked in his house, but as a woman with a gentle heart and a profound impact on the lives of both him and his daughter. Before that moment in the music room, Nathaniel had never truly noticed Elena Torres. She had been part of the household, always present but never prominent, just a name on a staff list. Someone who ensured everything ran smoothly in his absence. He never imagined he'd have any reason to think of her beyond that role. But now, after what he'd seen, he couldn't stop thinking about her. He began to recall the little things, how Sophie always lit up when Elena walked into the room, how dinner times had gone more smoothly since she arrived, how the house itself seemed calmer. Every detail bore Elena's quiet touch, gentle, graceful, and unassuming. Nathaniel realized he had never once asked Elena about her life. He didn't know where she was from, what she studied, what she loved. She had always been there, but invisible to him. And now, that thought unsettled him. He started to notice. He listened to her voice when she spoke with Sophie, soft, patient, sincerely engaged. He watched the way she moved through the house, careful, thoughtful, as if it were her own home. And most surprising of all was the warmth he felt in his chest whenever he saw her. Nathaniel, a man who'd always kept his emotions sealed behind meetings and metrics, now felt something within him beginning to shift, all because of a woman he had never truly seen until now. Nathaniel started coming home earlier. He told his assistant he needed to work from home more often, but the truth was, he wanted to be there not just for Sophie, but for Elena. Every afternoon, when he returned, he'd find Elena and Sophie in the living room or out in the garden. They played piano, read books, or made tea together. The atmosphere was calm, gentle, something Nathaniel rarely felt in his high-pressure corporate world. He didn't interrupt. He'd sit nearby, pretending to read the paper or review reports, but really, he listened, to Sophie's laughter, to Elena's soft words of encouragement. He began to understand why his daughter was so attached to her. One afternoon, Elena told Sophie a story about her childhood in a small town and the old piano she learned to play on, back when her fingers were too short to reach the wider keys. Nathaniel, seated not far away, felt something stir in his chest. The story was simple, but honest, and it made him feel close. Elena had no idea she was becoming a permanent presence in his thoughts. Nathaniel started noticing every little thing she did, the way she knelt to tie Sophie's shoelaces, the way she tied her hair back while cooking, or how she quietly listened when Sophie played a song with all the wrong notes. Nothing about Elena was flashy, but everything about her drew him in. And what surprised him most was the anticipation. Each morning he wondered if he'd see her smile that day. Each night he recalled the sound of her voice and felt something inside him soften. Nathaniel never thought his heart could feel like this again, but Elena, in her quiet, unassuming way, was doing exactly that, one moment at a time. Not everyone saw Elena the way Nathaniel and Sophie did. Margot Grant, Nathaniel's mother, was the first to voice her suspicions. A sharp, seasoned woman, Margot had always prioritized the family's reputation above all else, and when she noticed her son growing too close to the household nanny, she didn't hide her disapproval. "You're letting emotions cloud your judgment," Margot said during a family dinner, her voice calm but cutting. "She's here to care for Sophie, not to become the center of attention." And Nathaniel didn't respond right away, but his eyes darkened. Margot didn't stop there. She began scrutinizing Elena, her clothes, her mannerisms, even the way she spoke. She claimed Elena was incompatible with the Grant household, that she was becoming too close to Sophie to the point of overshadowing a father's role. Then, one afternoon, Margot summoned Nathaniel to the study and delivered her verdict. "If you don't put an end to this emotional entanglement, I will have her dismissed." The words sliced through the peaceful rhythm the house had come to know. Sophie, though young, sensed the shift. She grew quiet, withdrawn, as if afraid one wrong move might cost her the person who meant the most to her. Nathaniel stood caught between two forces, the weight of family expectations and the undeniable feelings he had for Elena. He knew his mother wasn't one to change her mind easily, but for the first time in his life, he began to question, was the polished image of perfection his mother so fiercely protected worth losing something so real? Nathaniel said nothing that entire afternoon. He walked the long hallways of the estate, his mind spinning with his mother's words. But it wasn't because he didn't know what to do. It was because he had never truly stood up to her before. That evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, Nathaniel found Margot in the library, reading her usual stack of financial papers. He stood before her, eyes steady. "You're not firing Elena," he said, his voice calm but firm. Margot looked up, slowly setting the papers aside. "You're letting emotions override your judgment." "No," Nathaniel replied. "I'm finally starting to see what really matters." He told her about the small but powerful changes Elena had brought, not just to Sophie, but to him. That for the first time in years, someone had entered their home and made things feel real, closer, warmer. "My daughter smiles more, the piano plays again each afternoon, and this house doesn't feel so cold anymore." Margot was silent. For the first time, she looked at her son not as someone to correct or guide, but as a man making his own choice. "Do you love her?" she asked quietly. Nathaniel didn't answer right away, but his eyes, calm, unwavering, spoke volumes. "Then," Margot sighed as she rose from her chair, "make sure she's worthy of that trust." It wasn't full approval, but for Nathaniel, it was the first time he felt he didn't need permission to love someone, and more importantly, it was the moment he chose to stand up, not against his mother, but for what made him and his daughter truly happy. After the conversation with his mother, Nathaniel knew there was one more thing he needed to do: talk to Elena. That night, after Sophie had gone to bed, he asked Elena to join him in the back garden. The air was cool, soft yellow lights lined the path, and everything felt unusually still. "Do you have a minute?" he asked as she folded Sophie's little scarf. Elena nodded. They sat on the stone bench, surrounded by blooming lavender. Nathaniel took a deep breath and spoke without circling around. "I just wanted to thank you, not just for what you've done for Sophie, but for what you've brought into this house and into my life." Elena smiled faintly, though a flicker of uncertainty lingered in her eyes. "I know, maybe I've made things uncomfortable," Nathaniel continued. "That wasn't my intention. I've never had someone touch my life so gently." Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then she spoke, softly, like a confession. "I didn't expect to feel this way either. I thought this was just a job. But then Sophie? And then you." They both laughed, a little awkward, a little shy, but inside that laugh was recognition that the feelings they carried were no longer something either of them could ignore. Elena shared her past, about her small-town family, her early love for the piano, the dreams left unfinished because of life circumstances. Nathaniel listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix anything. He simply listened, as if every word she said was something he'd been waiting to hear. When the story ended, neither of them spoke, but they didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full of understanding, as if two people had finally found each other after being lost for a very long time. One spring afternoon, golden sunlight filled the once quiet, echoing living room. Today, music floated through the air, gentle, occasionally hesitant, but full of feeling. Sophie was playing her favorite piece, her small fingers pressing each note carefully. Elena sat beside her, not touching the keys, just smiling and softly humming along. Across the room, Nathaniel stood quietly. He said nothing, and didn't need to. He simply watched and felt. The house that once felt like a hollow shell was now full of life, not because of artwork or luxury decor, but because of these sounds: the piano under Sophie's fingers, Elena's soft voice, and a peace in Nathaniel's heart he had never known. When the song ended, Elena looked up and met Nathaniel's gaze. They didn't speak, but their eyes held a quiet understanding of all they had been through, of the fear and doubt they had overcome, and of the connection they had found. Nathaniel walked over, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. Sophie looked up at them both and smiled, a true, unguarded smile. There were no promises of forever, no fairy tale proposals or grand declarations. Just this moment, three people, three once lonely hearts, sitting side by side, held together by music, understanding, and a love growing quietly, day by day. The love between Nathaniel and Elena didn't grow loud or fast. It unfolded slowly, like a soft melody deepening with every note. Sophie was the first to notice. She often held Nathaniel's hand and whispered, "You should keep Miss Elena forever." And one afternoon, while the two of them were peeling apples in the kitchen, Sophie looked up with sparkling eyes. "Dad, let's plan a surprise proposal, but it has to be a secret." Nathaniel laughed, but the idea touched something he'd been thinking about for many quiet nights. He nodded, gently squeezing her hand. "We'll do it together." The plan unfolded quietly, a song Sophie practiced for weeks, a small garden decorated with Elena's favorite flowers, and a simple ring in a velvet box. On a golden afternoon, Elena was invited outside to hear Sophie perform. She had no idea that when the final note ended, Nathaniel would step forward, kneel, and speak the truest words he had. "I don't know how you turned this empty house into a home, but I know I never want to live a day without you in it." Elena's tears flowed, Sophie clapped with joy, and in the middle of smiles and blooming flowers, Elena's gentle "yes" became the most beautiful answer Nathaniel had ever received. They held a small, intimate wedding in the garden where so many of their moments had lived. No extravagance, no spectacle, just real love, honest vows, and eyes shining with quiet joy. As time passed, their new life took root. Nathaniel restructured his schedule to spend more time at home. Elena continued teaching Sophie the piano, now with a wedding band glinting on her finger. Margot, once skeptical, gradually softened, especially as she watched her son smile in ways she hadn't seen since he was a boy. Then one sunny morning, Sophie ran through the house shouting, "A baby! I'm going to be a big sister!" That family, once scattered and incomplete, had become a complete composition, each person a note, each moment a beat. And love, the melody that turned their once lonely lives into a perfect harmony. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Sometimes, love isn't about forever. It's about choosing each other, day by day, with honesty and heart. If this story touched you, leave a little heart, share it with someone who needs it, and come back to Noah's Stories, where the simplest tales speak to the deepest parts of us.